an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Jane the Virgin Season 2, Chapter 37, Episode 15. In this episode, Rogelio is rescued, thank God, but it's pretty harrowing. I was right to have trust in this show because they do not treat it lightly. Also, Michael's parents are being assholes. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Oh, you know what? Let me just double check, but I'm pretty sure today is Claire that I'm thanking. Yes, it is. Thank you, Claire, for commissioning this episode. You guys, I watched this one twice, and I just got so angry both times. Can I just tell you? Okay, look. Here's the thing. I fully appreciate the point of view of Michael's parents regarding everything because of the information that they are working with, right? However, I really have to point out, as much as Michael stands up for Jane, and he does, he's very aggressive, actually, in telling his parents to fucking stop. And they even get up and leave the restaurant at one point. And I fucking love it. Okay? This is what you want in a partner. It's part of what drew me to Owen, actually. Because there was a whole thing going on when I started the podcast when I was with Brendan. And we had this listener who, he was like a hardcore fan right from the beginning of the show. And he donated money and talked us up in different places and was just like very supportive. However, he was also kind of a piece of shit, unfortunately, which we didn't like realize immediately. And eventually he wound up using some incredibly shitty language about some people that we had invited onto the show. And he used this language and tagged us both in his tweet. And it was a bizarre move because I don't know what he thought we were going to say when we had just had these people on as guests and enjoyed our time. But he seemed to think that it was laughable that I would be upset that he tagged me because I use like swear words, and he thought that was my issue. And when I called him out, this man went to town just shitting on me. And Brendan never, ever responded to him at all. He never said anything. And I was waiting for him to like step in and do anything, and he didn't. And then finally somebody did. And it was Owen. And he just told this person, like, you are so wrong. You're missing the whole point. What the fuck is your problem? Get a life. And it was like, I didn't know how much it bothered me that Brennan just didn't say or do anything until that moment. And since then, there have been more than one time that Owen has like stepped in and been like, what the fuck? Or things that he has heard afterward that his family has said to me. And he almost like started some shit over it. And I had to be the one to be like, just let it go. Just let it go, babe. But I just appreciated knowing he was willing to do that, because unfortunately, something that you see a lot when people are asking for relationship advice is a woman feeling as if her partner doesn't have her back when his mother says something shitty or has a really like unreasonable expectation or is clearly like leaving them out and sort of like giving them the cold shoulder regarding certain family stuff or whatever. And like the husband or boyfriend doesn't want to make waves and isn't willing to be confrontational with their family because either they secretly agree with that family member, which is hard to tell sometimes, but I feel like that is definitely a major factor upon occasion, or they are cowards who value keeping the peace above what's right. And it's really, really hard to watch that kind of thing take place because I am just like, personally, have been blessed with family that doesn't put me in that position. And so I don't really know how I would handle certain things because I would never have been in that position because my family's not like that. But knowing that were his family to behave this way, that Owen would tell them to get fucked, it's just really nice to know I have somebody on my side who is just there for me in that respect. It matters, you know? So I want to give Michael his due in this episode where he is pissed at his family and disgusted with their attitude and just really frustrated and it seems like embarrassed. And I love that. That's the exact energy that I want. However, my issue is his parents seem to have no idea about the fact that Michael lied to Jane for months. And that's the thing that really bothers me, is that they are behaving as if Jane just dropped Michael because she fell in love with somebody else. And yes, she did fall in love with somebody else, but she wouldn't have left the way that she did if Michael hadn't been misleading her about everything and minimizing her feelings about this pregnancy and her desires regarding raising this child. He lied constantly, and there's no mention of that at all. And this was something that, like, I understand the point of the episode is really about Jane letting go of being liked. And that's a valuable lesson. But it really, really bothers me about the writing that this issue with Michael isn't brought up ever. And as much as Michael is defensive of Jane and is telling his parents, we're not accepting this and we're leaving, I wanted him to, like, take responsibility for his part in their breakup and explain to them, I wasn't perfect, guys. I did this thing. She let me know how important it was to her that the family that took the baby was like this and they weren't, and she was having an affair, and I lied and covered it up and almost lost my job. Like, I wanted him to place himself between his parents and Jane in a much less, like, right now immediate because of this situation sort of way, and much more in a historically this is what actually went down, which you guys didn't know about because frankly it's none of your fucking business kind of way. And that's just never done, and it really bugs me. This is the sort of thing that just always gets under my skin when there is a perfectly logical and reasonable argument to be made by a character and they just don't ever make that argument. It feels extremely artificial. It feels like we are avoiding that because it would just end the conflict too quickly. And for the story, we need this conflict as a beat for our plot that we have pre-decided. And I really don't even think that's fair. Like, I think Jane could bring up that Michael was lying, and we could see his parents actually decide to ignore that Michael was lying and continue to blame Jane, and her then have to come to peace with not being liked in the face of people who are actually actively unreasonable. And for me, and this may just be me speaking on myself, but for me, that's much, much more difficult. I can come to peace with people not liking me if, from their perspective, I understand how they're seeing things a certain way. And if I feel, no, I did do something wrong, There's total, like, that's legit. I have people in my past that we stopped being friends, and I have to look at my behavior and be like, they stopped being friends because I was a shit. You know, like, that's my fault. It sucks they don't like me, and I have to just accept the fact that I did things that warranted them not liking me. But it's way harder to accept that people aren't going to like you for things that actually are kind of untrue. And yet, you still have to, like, come to terms with that as an adult. People in the world are going to think the wrong thing about you sometimes. People in the world are going to get told stories that aren't true about you. And I'm not trying to pretend that this is this major, like, sort of conspiracy theory, because I'm not one of those people that shares memes about, like, oh, people will act like they have your back and then they'll turn and tear you down. I don't have, like, haters like some people pretend to have. I really don't believe that. That's the sort of thing that's like, I believe if you really think you have haters, either you're imagining that and paranoid, or maybe you're actually not a good person and maybe you need to, like, deal with that. But I know that there have been a couple specific conflicts in my life that have been important, involving folks I was close to. And in one case, somebody directly involved with my podcast that I did more than one show with. And this person completely lied blatantly and flat out about me to my listeners, friends of theirs who were listeners, and caused me to lose a lot of support. And I just have to deal with the fact that those people left because they were lied to and they believed the lie. And there comes a point where you just have to say to yourself, if somebody was willing to believe a lie about you rather than your version of the story, they are not a person worth being friends with or having support from, because they obviously do not value you enough to believe you. And it's a shitty feeling. It fucking sucks. But that's life. You know, people are not always going to believe the truth. And it's just something that you have to sort of get used to, because there's, you know, a very childish quality in me where I think once I am allowed to explain my side of things, everyone will see. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. And I wanted this to be that kind of scenario where Jane gets to explain what really happened and realize that it doesn't make any difference to them. They are determined to be on their son's side, even if he has done something shitty. And even if Michael is trying to take full responsibility, that they are willing to go on making excuses for him and laying the blame solely at Jane's feet, and that she's going to have to just, like, be the person that they blame, and that's going to be the role that she plays, and it sucks and it's unfair, and that's just part of the deal if she wants to be with Michael. And I feel like that would have been a much more valuable lesson. But instead, they play it like this, and I really felt like it was not well written, and it could have been way better, and it just instead was extremely frustrating to watch. And all the more so because Michael did seem to have her back. And I just wanted that to mean more, you know? Rowan is in the chat saying, I will never like Michael, but also I sometimes think the show conveniently forgets plot points sometimes. That's an interesting point, Rowan. That never occurred to me, that maybe, like, the writers literally forgot that Michael was lying. Maybe that's it. Because, yeah, they're really making it sound like she met Rafael and all of a sudden just dropped Michael. And it's such a lie. I would never have been at all supportive of her dropping Michael the way that she did, because I didn't even like Rafael, except for the fact that Michael had been such a liar for so long. And even when she finds out that he's been lying, he's not really that sorry. he like is very defensive and tries to behave as if he was sort of justified in all of it, even while he's apologizing. And it didn't feel like a genuine apology, and it didn't feel as if he really understood why she was so angry. So for me, when they split, I was more than done with him. Like, that was it. And it's just really annoying that we're just going to act as if that didn't happen. So writers, get your fucking shit together, guys. Like, what are you doing? So anyway, I just really wanted to address that specifically because wanting to be liked is a major issue. I have this as well. Rashawn has this, and we were talking about it, I think, on A Song of Ice and Fire recently, where we both realized what a bullshit combo it is to A, really need to be liked, but B, have a very low threshold on pretending to be pleasant to people that we don't like. We have a hard time, both of us, with masking and just can't keep it up for very long. And it's not a good combo. If you want people to like you, you need to be able to do the social thing in a certain way. You need to be able to perform that. And if you can't do it, but you also want to be liked, you're just going to be disappointed a lot of the time, you know? So I really, really understand Jane's need to be liked. I mean, fucking same. But it's kind of funny because as much as I want to be liked, I have reached a point in my life where I am starting to understand that if everybody likes you, that kind of means that you don't really stand for anything. Like, as I have gone on with the podcast and I have begun to understand the ways in which certain people have been successful with podcasting and versus others, a lot of the success that I see is due to straddling a line that I personally find immoral. Like, I am just not willing to set aside the facts of what our world is and does to people in a way that other people kind of can be willing to do just to keep an audience. And I have come to realize it matters much more to me to feel like I'm being honest than it is to feel like I'm liked. And it's tough. I want everybody to like me because I want everybody to have empathy with each other and agree with me that we have the resources to keep everybody safe and healthy and happy, and we simply are not using them. And I don't feel like that's a lot to ask, but evidently it really is. So all of this to say, it's really crushing because Michael doesn't realize that his parents have turned on Jane, which is genuinely funny to me because he just really must not be close with them at all. And I mean, we see that he really isn't. But the fact that he is so blindsided by their reaction to their engagement party invite it's something that, as somebody who was closer to my father, I would have known about this before they showed up, you know. But there's also the fact that it's caused his parents to like get along with each other better when they normally hate each other because they are unified in their mistrust of Jane. So I'm just going to go through like what happens here because they come to his house to tell him, we don't think you should marry her, that you're making a huge mistake. Jane is crushed and she leaves so that they can talk, but then they are like meant to go out to dinner together and they just gang up on her. And his mother is asking like, how soon after breaking up with Michael did you go like get together with Rafael, which is absolutely none of her business. And I really was bummed that Jane even answered the question. Who the fuck are you? Like, I don't have to justify myself to you, you know? And that's the thing about wanting to be liked, is that you do feel like you need to. Especially if you think that you have like a leg to stand on. You keep telling yourself, if they just got more information, they would side with me. And like, some people are just determined to not side with you, and it won't matter what you tell them. But in this case, it was just super none of her business. And I really wanted Michael to just put a stop to it entirely and just be like, you know what? Jane doesn't have to tell you that. And thankfully, he does draw everything to a stop and say, we're leaving, and gets up. But I wanted it to happen sooner. And I wanted Jane to also put her foot down, because it's just what the reason that they broke up changes the fact that she went to Rafael that night. And also, just like for my own self, I know what it is like to be with somebody and have things falling apart while you're already falling for somebody else. So it's a difficult thing when somebody is like, well, you went to see him the same night, but like in your heart, that relationship had ended like long before that very night. And that is how it was with me and Brendan. We had agreed we were getting a divorce months before I actually physically left. But the reality is that I left Philly after things blew up and he found out that I had been talking to Owen, and saw Owen that night. I flew from Philly to Dallas, and you could easily see it as soon as she broke up with her husband, she flew to her boyfriend. That's not exactly what happened. But if you were going to be unkind and really like uncharitable about it, you could frame it that way. But it's completely ignoring the fact that we were having a lot of problems and had like essentially separated from one another, even though we hadn't physically separated. And who needs to know those details? Nobody needs to know those except for me and the men I'm involved with. Like, it's nobody else's business. So that whole thing was just really difficult to watch, because the way she was putting her on the spot, like there's a literal spotlight that pops up, and there's a joke from the narrator about how maybe this is where Michael gets his interrogation skills, which was actually a pretty good joke. But Jane eventually, like, she decides that she's going to go drive to Michael's mother's house. And apparently she lives like 2 hours away or something. And convince her to come to the engagement party, because they leave. They're not even going to go. And she stands on the steps, not realizing that Jane's mom is in the middle of her book club, and tells her, I understand as a mother how much you want to defend your son and keep him from being hurt. But if you don't come, he's going to be really hurt by that, and I know that you don't want to hurt him. And then what happens is that Rogelio kind of has like a panic attack. And he asks Jane to come and talk to him. And she stays with him and basically like misses the engagement party. And Michael's parents are utterly unforgiving about this. And this was one case where it was like, I did kind of see their point in how Jane made it so clear, if you miss this, you will hurt him. And then you didn't come. However, it's not that she didn't not come because she was trying to make a statement about disapproving, which was going to be your motive. She didn't come because her father was almost murdered after being kept prisoner in his home for weeks. And if you guys can't find it in your heart to understand this man having trauma from that, then fuck you. For real. Like, genuinely, on a very deep, basic level. And her feeling the need to be like, if we come to the wedding, we're coming for his sake, not yours. You know what? Who fucking cares? Bye. And I was so glad Jane just said noted, because she has reached a point where she's just like, I know that Michael understands why I wasn't there. I don't need your approval on that. He gets it, and he understands, and he is okay with it. And that's the only person that I'm worried about in this scenario. And she was fucking right. She was right. So in the end, I liked the overall way this was handled, but I just felt like there was a lot more they could have done, and they just didn't. And it was weird. And Rowan, I'm just going to go ahead and like run with your assumption here that maybe they just forgot about that. That sounds like something that happened. That sounds like the kind of thing that, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, probably you're right. So let's back up and talk about Rogelio, because I was saying in the last episode how concerned I was about the way that the show was handling him being imprisoned. It felt very much like it was being treated as such a joke, and this was a truly upsetting thing that was happening. And I really wanted to feel as if it was being taken more seriously. And I felt like this episode just addressed that for me. It was, they still had to treat it as if it were a bit of a joke, because that's the tone of the show. But within that, they managed to really, like, get it across how upset Rogelio was. And the way that this woman, she's a very good actress. She really does come across as fucking unhinged. But she's putting some poison into this wine. And she says, it'll be quick, painless, and when our death goes viral, we'll be famous. And he is looking at her with these tears in his eyes. And you can see this is the face of a person who genuinely believes, oh my God, my life is like ending and I have no control over this at all. And that was just heartbreaking. It was so sad, you guys. And it says his life really did begin to flash before him. And we see all of the moments where he like met Jane and her family and held Mateo for the first time and was dancing with Shamara and joking around with Michael. And then all of a sudden he sees Michael in the window behind Paula. And I can't remember what her actual name is. I keep calling her Paula, but this was really great because what it turns out is that Jane just said to Michael, look, I told my dad that we were like back together and getting married, and I still haven't heard from him. Something's wrong. Can you please go check on him? And he comes up, and it's very funny. When Michael comes to his front door, there's a box labeled cosmetic crate, which is, it's very much like an Ipsy or like a Birchbox. And I just thought it was so funny that this was one of the giveaways that shit was wrong, because when has he ever not gone right out to get his cosmetic crate? And so Michael manages to like find his way around the outside of the building and sees all of that mail that's piled up on a chair. One of the awards that he has won is like tipped over. And obviously, all of this is just very irregular. And then we see Rogelio with the wound on his head, and he is chained to this chair. The fact that she has found like matching pajamas for the two of them, I don't know why that detail is like simultaneously hilarious and also very disturbing. But there's like a strong purple theme going on in his apartment that I feel like I didn't notice as much until this plot beat. And I don't know if she's changed things or if the purple is supposed to be like a color for distress or what's going on. But I felt like kind of conflicted about it because it looks great. I really like the look of it, but also considering what's happening right now, I shouldn't. And what he does is he tells Paula, if we're going to live stream this murder-suicide, can we please do it outside? And the way he phrases this is, don't let me die against a flat background lit by unflattering light. Can we please go out to where there's natural light and the sound of the ocean? And honestly, that request is very in character. I wouldn't have had suspicions raised by this at all either if I were her. And I really liked this as the way that he gets her to open the door. So she steps outside and she says, okay, we'll go outside. And then as she says that, Michael comes in and grabs the weapon away from her and arrests her. And Rogelio is just so relieved. Like, he really thought, you guys, he's got the wine with the poison in it in his hand. Like, it's awful. So I was just so glad that this went down the way that it did, because I was really worried that he was going to be rescued, but that she was somehow going to wriggle her way out of it and continue to be like a threat out in the world. Now, that may still happen. Like, who knows what's going to, but as of right now, it looks like she's just been handled, and that there's more than enough evidence to prove that she was keeping him against his will, and that this will be an open and shut case. So, all right, now we're like, the thing with Rogelio, the way that he won't talk about it to Jane, and he says that he wants to keep it because there's a guy from Telemundo that he's always dreamed of being interviewed by, and so he's like acting as if he wants to keep the story fresh for the interview, but it's clear he's just like having a really hard time talking about it because it was so traumatic that he's emotional and he doesn't know how to deal with those emotions, which I totally understand. I am somebody who strong emotions are very difficult for me, and I have a lot of, especially in front of a group of people, I have a lot of trouble letting that sort of thing out. And like the time when Jane is asking, do you want to tell us what happened? She's there with her mother and her grandmother and his publicist. Like, there are people there that make it much less intimate. And I could understand it just feeling kind of unsafe. And I would not be comfortable telling the story in front of them either. Like, this would be something that I would need a one-on-one time, And so eventually, when he like calls her to come and talk to him, he says that he doesn't know if he can do this interview because every time he starts to talk about it, he gets so choked up because he really did genuinely think that he was going to die. And I was relieved that he admits this and that it's treated with gravity, because I was just worried that it was going to be, okay, Rogelio went through this like bonkers thing that's straight out of a telenovela, and he's going to be able to flip that in such a way that he rides this wave of success, and we treat it as a terrible thing that happened but wasn't really dealt with in a serious way, and it somehow catapults him into even greater fame, and that's all we get. And I was just really glad that he is obviously going to need time to like get over this, and probably will become a little bit paranoid. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes a little bit of a plot point for him that his easy back and forth with fans that he has had up to this point starts to fall away a little bit. He has been somebody who, he will drop everything to take a selfie with somebody. He will be very open and friendly. And maybe that won't happen the same way anymore. Now that he has been through this and he can see that there are threats out there, it may change the way that he interacts with everybody. And that would be interesting, even though it would be like heartbreaking to see. So, okay, let's back up to Jane, who is meeting with her professor, her like advisor, and it's a new advisor. This is Professor Marlene Donaldson, author of Gendered Politics and the Politics of Gender, a memoir. And then it says asterisk, self-published. And I enjoyed this because the way that they play her, first of all, she straight up responds to Jane saying that she does romance with Barf. And I liked that Jane just says, excuse me, what was that? Like, she doesn't let it slide. And she just responds, I said barf. Now, what she brings up is that, first of all, she wants Jane's writing to pass the Bechdel test, which that's become a very commonly tossed around sort of litmus test on whether or not the women characters in any given medium are real, legitimate characters. If they each have their own name and they have conversations about things other than a man. Do they have independent interior lives that don't involve dudes? And this is the kind of thing that I understood why Jane focused on it, because this advisor focuses on it. But Jane was under the impression, as we find out later, that merely getting her writing to pass this test was going to mean that the advisor approved of it. And that isn't how it works. She calls it pretty much baseline, which is correct. That's the thing. It is the lowest bar that you can clear if you're trying to write women characters. And I can understand it being difficult if you're writing a romance, because your instinct is to have your character talk about their interests, their love interest all the time. And since Jane's love interests are hetero, that man is going to be all over the place in the conversation. But later on, after Jane submits her first thing and Marlene tells her, I didn't respond to the material, she then says, are you trying to write something that means something? Are you trying to say something? Or is this just supposed to be something for bored housewives? And you guys, I want Jane to push back on this so much. The narrator in that moment says that Jane found this offensive, and she doesn't say so, and I totally understand why. And I also understand, if you are somebody who looks at things through a feminist lens, why romance would be something that you had a hard time with. I understand both sides of this, because this is often an issue for me. You guys know that in a lot of things that I have covered, when a romance has been introduced to the story, it's been what I have had the biggest trouble responding to, because I often just don't really care that much. And it can be difficult to get me on board. But a lot of times the reason for that for me is that people don't know how to write romance well. In books, a lot of the time it'll be as simple as this person's extremely attractive and they did something morally good one time. And it's just supposed to be, now, of course, they're in love with them. And it's as a person who needs a lot more than that to be interested in somebody that I have met in a romantic way, I have never really understood that being enough to root for characters to get together. And it can feel well, I'm just meant to root for them because that's what I'm reading, and that's the agreement we have come to. But I also really take exception to trying to be if it's for bored housewives, then it's worthless. Because that is just also such a sexist thing to say. So she's weirdly managing to be misogynist while thinking she's standing up for women as characters. And this is not an uncommon phenomenon. I mean, I'm sure I was guilty of this many times in my life. But there have been so many pieces of media that were respected solely because men were the target audience and dismissed solely because women were the target audience. And the fact that we just act as if if women who don't have real jobs like it, then this is completely immaterial. Why are we so down on housewives, man? Housewives have hard fucking jobs. There's certainly exceptions to that, where people are housewives because they are incredibly privileged and do not have hard lives. But they are the exception. They really are. And to behave as if a woman is a housewife, the mere fact that she likes something devalues it is so, like, incredibly fucked up. Like, just stop and think about what you're saying, you know? And it's the sort of thing that Rashawn has often brought up, the phenomenon of how people didn't take the Beatles seriously when it was a major female fandom that they had. Young women who were just completely into them. And once men became interested, then the Beatles were like a legitimate band that we should pay attention to and see as one of the greatest bands in history. But when it was young women, they were just like pop idols who nobody should listen to or take seriously at all. And it's super frustrating to me that this woman is taking this attitude. And I want Jane to call her out on that specifically, because if she thinks that this is her being feminist, she's super wrong. Like, this is the opposite of that. And you're just implying that some women are just worth more than others. And that's really gross. You can say that something isn't well written. You can say that a romance wasn't gripping. You can say that this feels like you're going for an easy, lazy way of telling a story without acting as if an entire audience of people is somehow bringing down the legitimacy of your work. So anyway, the best that she can do eventually is to tell Jane that, like, she liked it slightly better later. And even though Jane's whole thing, this arc, is supposed to be about her coming to terms with not being liked, she decides that she's taking baby steps. And the fact that this guidance counselor, I keep saying, like, her name is Maureen, I think, or is it Marlene? Marlene. That she likes her work. She's like, I'm just going to say that I needed her to like it, and baby steps. And I think that's fair. Like, when you have somebody who is your advisor, of course you want them to approve of what you're doing. They are advising you because they have more experience and know more, allegedly. So one could argue the point of an advisor is to get their approval, you know? So I don't have any problem with that at all. Rowan says, Professor Donaldson is a little bit of a character. She's not totally two-dimensional, but I have notes. That's kind of how I was feeling. And remind me, I don't remember exactly what year this season dropped. I feel like when I looked into it, this was like 2009 or something. So it's early on enough that I could see we're going to have like a feminist advisor be very, as you say, if not just two-dimensional, there'll be certain notes we're definitely going to hit. But one could hope that this character, if this were written today, would be a little bit different. So this, like, the best we get for this episode is Jane getting like, you've improved some. It's not exactly approval, but it's, you're on an upward trajectory, which is good enough. So then, okay, now I want to talk about Rafael, because we have, first of all, Rafael dealing with Petra, who is having a lot of trouble bonding with her children. This is fascinating to me. And it's the sort of thing where Petra at one point says, I don't know if this is for me, about motherhood. And he says, it is, but you've just been avoiding them. And he wants to encourage her to bond with these children. Now, I recognize that this is not the direction the show is going to go in, because clearly the show wants Petra to be on a track for the audience to like her a little bit more. And it wouldn't work if they did this because of patriarchy. But hear me out. What if it wasn't for Petra? Would that be so terrible? What if she found out she didn't like being a mother? What if she didn't like babying her babies and she wanted to pay somebody to mostly do it? And it wasn't that she didn't love her children, but that she found this labor thankless and exhausting and the expectations unreasonable, and she just didn't want to do it. What if that were how she was? Would that be so awful? Because I would like to remind everybody that in the first season, when Rafael is talking with Jane about raising their kid, he is fully prepared to get a nanny and spend very little time with that kid himself. And I recognize that, like, in part that was supposed to be a problem, but it would be way more of a problem for Petra to be that than for him to be that. And we just have to, like, admit that that's the double standard that we hold. And I wouldn't hate it if it turned out Petra wound up with twins after trying to blackmail her ex-husband to be with her again, and then realized, oh my God, I don't like kids. I think that would be kind of fascinating. And what now? How does she react to them? How does that affect her relationship with Rafael? How does that affect the way her children age and grow up? Would we do a jump ahead in time to these children being older and seeing how they turned out? Would that change? What would this mean for Jane and the way that she views Petra or Rafael? I think that would be kind of cool. But again, I know we're not going to do that because, frankly, we just don't do that with women characters that aren't meant to be villains. And it's a shame, but there it is. I love the fact, too, that she's got two nannies and they are both lusting after Rafael. But she doesn't realize that because when they speak to each other, they're speaking in, like, Dutch, I think. So yeah, the two of them are just, like, kind of giggling to each other about how they would like to sit on Rafael all night. And she's like, see, they think the idea of you sitting up with them all night is silly, too. And she has just gotten right back into work. And Rafael eventually has to bring her in and send the nannies home for the evening and have a bonding night with Petra where they each take one of the babies. And I love that they can't tell them apart yet. So he had one of the nannies draw a star on the bottom of Elsa's foot so that they know which one is which. I thought that was very funny. But Petra's really kind of a minor thing in this episode because what we're really dealing with the most with Rafael is him and his brother. So his brother turns up. This guy is such a fuck. He really, and this is not the same actor, but for those who have seen You, the Netflix series, the main actor in that, who was also in Gossip Girl, I haven't seen You. So just, letting y'all know that I do not know if that's actually any good. I know that it caused a bit of a stir when it came out and has gone on in a way that a lot of people feel like didn't work out well for it because the premise was not something sustainable. But let's see. Penn Badgley. The people on Gossip Girl have bonkers names. I'm looking at these now and just realizing, like, wow. But yeah, Penn Badgley. He is giving Penn Badgley vibes, his brother. There's just something about him that is so irritating. He's just a cool guy in this, like, mid-2000s sort of way where he's got the 5 o'clock shadow, he's got the shaggy hair, he's wearing, like, a blazer with a t-shirt and jeans and a scarf for, like, what reason? Just for fashion. And the whole look of him, the jewelry and everything, is just so cool guy, and he was irritating me immediately. And then he goes on to be quite annoying. There's a point where Rafael asks, like, did you know about me? And he says no, but he doesn't give up much more than that. He then says, like, I'm staying here. Can I send you the bill? Honestly, that I had no problem with. Like, the man owns the hotel, so yeah, he can pay for your fucking stay. But then they go and have lunch together, and Rafael is trying to talk to him, and he says, like, I'm not talkative. Like, that's one of his responses when he says, tell me about yourself. And when he says, Rafael says, like, look, how's the food? he just goes, eh. And really, like, so by the way, too, their table, this is one of my favorite things about the show, is that people often don't eat, but the tables, especially when they're at the Marbella, are loaded with food. So these guys have got, like, I'm looking at this. First of all, a plate, what looks like full of lobster. They each have their own huge, like, jumbo shrimp portions of shrimp cocktail. And they each also have, like, a dessert at the table at the same time. So Rafael has this beautiful, like, fruit tart. And his brother has what looks like a sort of, it's a layered cake, but it's like an individual cake. Unless that's a savory thing, because it looks like it has rosemary sticking up out of the top of it. They each have a lobster, but then between them is a steak. And there's also this, like, bowl of something yellow. And it's, like, definitely a bowl. So I don't know if that's meant to be some sort of sauce, or maybe that's the clarified butter for the lobster. And, like, this, the thing in front of Rafael, they each also, of course, have glasses of what either is champagne or mimosa, or just straight up orange juice. But yeah, there's so much food on this table. So when Rafael is just like, well, where were you? And he says, you want to know? Well, then let's go. And he gets up and just abandons this full table. You guys, the reaction that I had, I mean, that is like at least $200 worth of food. And he's just like, all right, well, I barely ate any of it. I gave you an when I said how it was, and now I'm just going to leave it here. Jesus Christ. But yeah, Rafael gets kind of confrontational here, because when he says, I'm trying to get to know you, his brother says, all right, well, then ask me the question that you really want to know. And he says, did you know our mother was a crime lord? And he says, no, did you? And he says, no, but I'm not the one who disappeared after she was exposed. And his brother says, and I didn't have tunnels under my hotel where people did illegal surgeries. And I was like, oh, bruh has a fucking point. Like, it was kind of hard for me to be mad at that, even though he was very irritating. I definitely was brought up short. And you can tell that Rafael was too. So then, where were you? And he says, you really want to know? Let's go. And despite the fact that Rafael was told not to go anywhere with him, he does. And even though the place he's going has no cell service, he does it anyway. And we get a kind of interesting scene between the two of them, where he comes out and he has brought a drink and glasses, but clearly Rafael is on edge and worried that he's about to be, like, threatened. And this kid's like, did you think I had a gun? And he's like, no, but he did. And he explains, I was here on this boat. I was in the middle of the ocean because when I heard about my mom, they started just taking all of our assets. They were just fucking taking everything. And I didn't know what to do. I was freaking out. And I just decided that I was going to get the boat and I was going to take off. I sat out here and I thought about things. My dad, for instance, ran half marathons twice a year. Died of a heart attack out of the blue. Did she kill him? Things like that. I loved that detail. I have no idea if this man is for real, if he's telling the truth about any of this. But this is a very real thing that happens. As somebody who listens to true crime, and especially Snapped episodes where they will interview the family members of the murderers, you will get folks who start to put things together and look at their history and realize that there are people in their past that things happened to that they no longer can say for sure were accidents, or that it went down the way that it looked like it did. And they have to question everything, and sometimes they just never get an answer. There are times where a body will get exhumed and tested if there's like a poison involved, or it will be very clear, even if they were never actually arrested and tried, that they definitely had something to do with somebody's death. But then there are things like this where it's really, there's no way to prove it. There's no, you just have to sort of live wondering and knowing that the person you would have thought was incapable of doing anything like that, clearly they're capable of it. And you didn't think so then, so who knows what more they're capable of that you never thought. And it changes the whole way that you look at a person. And Rafael, is obviously responding to his being vulnerable here. Thought about taking the plunge myself briefly because I didn't even have any family left. Suddenly I was alone. And then I punked out and headed back to good old Miami. And Rafael says, but you do have family. And holds out a glass, and they drink together. And we have a scene later on where he's talking to Michael on the phone, and he just straight up says to Michael, he had nothing to do with it. And you can keep investigating him if you want, but I am not going to participate in it because this is my family. And Michael says that Rafael is being played. And Rafael just says, you are entitled to your own opinion. But, that's what I'm doing. And he's saying all of this on the phone right in front of his brother. And I couldn't tell. I think Rafael means it, but there was a part of me that was like, is he doing this for his brother's benefit and actually doesn't believe it? He says, I meant it, but I don't know. And I can't tell how I feel about his brother in terms of whether or not he's actually innocent. Because I don't feel like you introduce a character like this and have him be completely ignorant of everything, squeaky clean. That's not interesting. He's got to have something to do with something. I feel like he must. But I don't know what that is, what that looks like, what I would want it to be. Genuinely do not know. So that's the end of the thing with Rafael. And now I'm almost out of time, but I am going to talk briefly about what's going on with Alba. Because, you guys, I said last episode that when she said that this beau of hers was bad luck, I really, I said I'm used to hearing about how bad luck is just you tripped and fell and broke your tooth or you lost your wallet. And I always saw it as a series of silly circumstances, but that it couldn't possibly be what she meant about this particular character. But it turns out that's exactly what it is. And she explains to them about how the first time that they ever made love was in this beautiful garden. And she said not only did the plants die the very next day, but no crops ever grew again, only frost. To which Jane says, Abuela, there are 100 different environmental factors that go into an early frost. And it then says #inconvenient truth, which I thought was very funny. I really, really liked that. And then she says, no, it was because of the curse. And I have to say, an early frost, that's one thing. Nothing ever grew again? That's a very different thing. I feel like Jane's hop, skipping, jumping right past that. What Alba is saying isn't just, we had an early frost. She's saying nothing ever grew again. And she doesn't even want to see this guy. So when he rings the bell, he shows up. This man is 6'6". I am Pablo Alonso Segura. And he's got this fucking mustache. And it's so funny because later Jane says to her grandmother, I would change because he is fine. And I was like, is he? Because I think this man looks like a cartoon character. But whatever. As soon as he steps into the house, the electricity goes out. And it turns out only their house has lost electricity. Every other house on the street is fine. Which, this keeps happening. All these different issues that really point to the fact that this curse is quite real. But they don't believe it. They keep explaining it away. And Alba definitely believes it. And she doesn't even want to see him. But eventually she comes out. I love the way that she walks out, you guys, because she's doing this sort of like telenovela walk with her shoulders back and her breasts thrust out, stepping to him with her eyes like half closed. It's very dramatic and very fun. And she agrees to go on a date with him. And we see the two of them, like, as they're talking here, a candle tips over and lights one of the tablecloths on fire. And again, just explaining it away. Eventually, they go out to dinner together, and the waitress like slips and falls and drops her tray. And somebody else slips and falls in the background while he's talking to Alba and saying, "You can't possibly blame me for what happened to her, right?" And I love the progression of this, because as they're talking, it's very clear that as much as Alba was right, I'm just going to say it about the curse, she was right. There's a curse, just straight up. The vibe between them is too strong, and it's gotten so it doesn't matter. Like, they're in the middle of talking about it. The curse is happening in front of their eyes. And she's just digmatized and does not care. And is just like, whatever. You know what? Curse schmurse. And the two of them get up on that fucking dance floor and begin to tango. And as they're tangoing, we go back to Jane and Shamara. And they're sitting in the living room, and Jane's like, "Do you hear that?" And I love how this just like builds with the dancing between the two of them. And Shamara is like, "Well, maybe that's just the house settling or something." And then, wait, I hear it now. And all of a sudden, the ceiling caves in along with all this water. Right, and it's in like their living room. So I'm assuming, I can't remember exactly where in the room it's positioned. So if it like completely falls in on their television or what, but the two of them, like, the damage that this will be doing, I don't know if it's that a pipe burst or what's going on, but that sucks. Like, that's the kind of thing that, unless you find somebody to just turn the water off, that's going to cause so much damage that I don't know that you can live in the house. Like, you may have to find somewhere to stay while it's being repaired and like deal with it from a second location. I really felt for them with this, because as somebody who's like riding on paycheck to paycheck, it's just stressful. But I know that, you know, if they need help, they have Rafael, who would be glad to help them get the place fixed up. It's just the anxiety of it, because this is what owning a home can be like. I think they're renting. I don't think they own this place, but nevertheless, when shit like this happens, you're never ready for it. And it happens, man. There's like no predicting it. You can be responsible and care for your place, and it still happens. So anyway, that's how it ends, is like the curse of Pablo Alonso Segura. And I am really curious how this is going to continue, because this is such a weird plot point. Like, it's genuinely really strange. So I'm looking forward to it. And I think this is probably them like doing a telenovela bit where curses come up in telenovelas, and so they were just like, what if we threw a curse in for our plot? What about that? And I'm here for it. I'm very into it. So, all right, I'm going to wrap this up, but this is a fun episode. I liked this one, even though I got frustrated. I'm interested to hear what everybody else thinks as well. So make sure to come into the Discord if you can, leave some comments, or on the Patreon. And I hope you guys are enjoying the coverage. Thank you again, Claire, for commissioning this one. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.